Hey there, and welcome back. Here we are with another Zero Theory video. This time we're going to be talking max point blank range. Now, if you've been around my channel for some time, I'm guessing you've probably seen the Battle Zero videos that I've put out previously with multiple different calibers, different barrel lengths, etc., to give you an idea of what a Battle Zero would perform like maybe on a setup similar to yours. In those videos, I've had a lot of comments around max point blank range zero, and that's actually what I was testing in those videos, and maybe that's what you're running. So with that, I wanted to put out a dedicated video on max point blank range because in my mind, they're actually separate concepts. Now, what's different? In my mind, a Battle Zero is chosen based on some arbitrary distance for the setup you're running. Maybe you only have access to a 25-yard line, or you only have access to a 50-yard line. So that's where you zero your rifle because that's what you're able to do before you go out shooting. So with a Battle Zero, you're curious, and I've showed you in my previous videos what those arbitrary distances will do out of a fighting type AR, 308, 5.56. I've got a couple videos there for you to see. Max point blank range, I believe, is different because you're actually choosing your zero distance based on a height range that you can accept for air out of your rifle. So in Battle Zero, you zero at 25 yards, you shoot out to X distance, and you just accept whatever you get for height distance. You have to understand how to hold under or over based on that distance for your setup. In max point blank range, we actually identify that target distance, we hold center, and from muzzle out to specified yardage, you're going to get impacts within the distance that you specified. So that's what I want to cover in this video. How do we determine our max point blank range zero for our setup? So say we have a height range that we can accept of a vital zone of 10 inches. How do we figure out where to zero our rifle to get impacts within plus or minus 5 inches for a 10-inch vital zone? And then how far out can we shoot that zero and effectively hold center and expect to hit within that 10-inch range? So in my mind, that's kind of the difference between a Battle Zero, choosing an arbitrary distance and accepting the performance, and max point blank range, where you define the performance and then set your specified zero based on your specific setup and the information for your rifle. So if you like the sounds of that, stick around. From here, we're going to quickly cover the concept of the max point blank range zero, and then we'll take a quick look at the gear I'm going to run in the video before we move into the shooting portion, where I show you how to figure out your max point blank range zero for your setup. I'm back with my trusty piece of cardboard that I'm going to use to illustrate the concept in this video. So for max point blank range zero, I've got me with my rifle here and my optic looking straight out, so line of sight is straight. Then when I fire my bullet, it's not going to defy gravity, but it's going to come up to meet line of sight, or line of sight's adjusted down. Doesn't matter to me how you want to define it. The bullet and the line of sight will meet at your close zero, and that's what I'm going to work with in this video. So on this rifle, my optic over bore height is 2.6 inches. I'm in a 1.54 inch mount. So roughly 2.6 inches is what I've plugged into my calculator. So my bullet is going to be coming up to meet line of sight at my close zero. It'll go above line of sight for some period of time before it falls back down to meet line of sight again. That's my far zero. And then it will continue to drop off indefinitely beyond that. Now, max point blank range, we want to define how tall of an area do we want to hit. So maybe the vital zone on my target is 10 inches tall. That means I want to hold center and be able to impact at most above 5 inches or at most below 5 inches to land in those vital zones out to this distance. So this is going to allow you to rapidly hold center and engage a target of relatively known height. Maybe you're hunting a deer, say a 10-inch vital zone, or a coyote, maybe with a 6-inch vital zone. It's going to depend on the target, and you're going to fine-tune your max point blank range based on that. So this concept will work with any target height, any rifle setup. You just have to understand the concept and then follow the steps I'm going to show you momentarily on how to set it up for your rifle. So that's the concept that we're going to be working with. What are we going to shoot in this video? You think about max point blank range, that's maybe a hunting type concept, so I thought it would be awesome to run my new Brenton USA 6-arc rifle. Brenton really markets this rifle as a hunting type rig. As you can see, it's missing things like a forward assist, there's no M-lock slots. It's got a very sleek forend, similar to a hunting feel on a rifle, maybe like a bolt action like you grew up with. So I thought this Brenton 6-ARC would be a fun rifle to show this concept with. This thing has been sent to me for use on the channel. I just received it in last week, and in this video I'm going to put some of the first rounds through it. So really excited to see how this rifle performs, see how it shoots, and I think it's going to be a great package to illustrate this max point blank range concept. This rifle is 100% Brenton. Everything about it is exactly as they sent it to me. Trigger, bolt carrier, all of it, just what they sent. For a suppressor, I've got my Griffin Armament Dual Lock 7 that I put on the end of the rifle. Really easy to install it. This Brenton comes with this a thread protector, so I was able just to throw my brake on and then mount my can. No problem, and it seems to run quite well on this rifle, as you'll see in the video. For an optics package, I was thinking maybe I wanted a light and handy rifle, maybe something you'd be carrying around for some predators. So I've got my Athlon 1:10 LPVO on here. This is in a Reptilia AUS 1.54 inch mount, and the whole package was sent out to me by Ally Munitions. They've been a huge supporter of my channel, really appreciate the support they've given me. And I would ask that when you think about your next precision rifle related purchase, hunting related purchase, you think about Ally Munitions. Ammunition we're gonna run in the video, this is just factory Hornady 108 ELDM match ammunition. This stuff, it seems to be coming down in price for 6-ARC. This is relatively affordable. I bought this, I believe, from Euro Optic here recently. It came in just the other day, and I was able to get out and play with it through this rifle. So from here, let's move in to the section at the range. I'm gonna show you how to determine your max point blank range 0, and then I'm gonna show you that in action out of this rifle out to my specified distance. Theory is great, but seeing how it performs in the real world is super fun to me. It's awesome to compare that theory to real world performance so you know what to expect out of your package. So let's get out to the range and start running some rounds through this rifle. So how do we determine the max point blank range for our specific setup? There's a handful of steps that'll allow us to do this fairly simply, and if you follow these steps, you can apply them to any rifle. In this example, I'm going to be using an 18-inch 6-ARC, but if you follow these, you can apply it to anything from a 22 all the way up to a big Magnum. The principle will be the same. The first thing we have to ask ourselves is how tall is the target we're trying to shoot? So for this example, I have an 11-inch tall sheet of paper with 1-inch graduations from my center dot out to each edge plus or minus 5. Maybe the animal I'm going to shoot has a 6-inch tall vital zone, so I can accept plus or minus 3 inches from my aiming point for a lethal shot. So for this example, keep in mind error of plus or minus 3 inches. Now we'll use our ballistic calculator to figure out our 0 distances. The first thing we're going to do in our calculator is make sure our rifle is properly set up. Things such as barrel twist, this is 1 7.5. Optic height, this is 2.6 total from center of optic to center of bore. It's a 1.54 inch mount, so you add that plus the receiver to get that 2.6 number. Then we have to go in and make sure our bullet information is correct. So as you can see in the clip that I'm going to roll here, I actually just zeroed this rifle at 100 yards, as many folks would do in a hunting type situation or with their hunting rig. So a beautiful 5-round group, centered up, great performance out of this 1 to 10, really happy with that 100-yard zero. And then I zeroed out my turrets. Perfect. The next thing I want to do after I have a solid 0 is make sure my bullet is set up properly in my calculator. So this is a 108 grain ELDM. I chronographed it running an average of 26.35. I know the length, I found that online. I know the G7BC is 0.270. And atmosphere conditions, 60 degrees. Let's bump that humidity down just a little bit to 50%. And that's exactly what we've got. So my bullet is set up properly. Now you can see I actually, to start with, we'll use a 25-yard 0. Save, we'll go ahead and load that. And out here I've got about 300 yards to work with. So now look at the column second from the left, path in inches. With a 25-yard 0, you can see at 200 yards my bullet is landing 8.6 inches above my line of sight, well beyond my 3-inch margin of error. So that's not going to work. Let's go back and adjust our 0 number. Maybe let's go try a 50-yard 0, something that we all use. So 50-yard 0. Let's load that same data. All right, with a 50-yard 0, you can see at 100 yards, I'm going to land 1.3 inches high, so within my margin of error. But on the bottom side, I start to drop out between 200 and 250 yards. I go beyond my 3-inch margin of error. So at 250, I'm negative 3.8. That's more than I can accept, and I think I can do a little bit better. So maybe let's move that 0 back just a little bit. Let's go to 45 yards. With a 45-yard zero, now at 150 yards, I'm 1.8 inches high, so within my margin of error. And then on the bottom side now at 250, I'm negative 2.7. So I can accept that, but I think I can do a little bit further. The more I maximize my plus or minus, the further out I can push the effectiveness of my max point blank range. So let's go ahead and bump back to a 40-yard zero. All right, with a 40-yard zero at 150 yards, we're 2.7 high. I like that, I can work with that. And on the far end, check out how my 250 is now negative 1.1, so I bought myself some more distance. With that, let's go over and see where our far capabilities are. Let's go to 280 yards. Go back to my solution. At 280 yards, you can see I'm negative 3.6 inches, so I'm a little bit beyond. Let's go back to 275. At 275, I'm negative 3.1. So with a 40-yard zero, I can hold center plus or minus 3 inches for my 6-inch vital zone hit from muzzle out to 275 yards. So let's go ahead and do that. But you're probably wondering, why did I zero at 100 yards? So let me show you how to get to your max point blank zero. So I'm going to go back and set my bullet to 100-yard zero, which is what we have on the gun. And just for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to go 100 yards so you can see it's showing zero. Now we'll go into solution and let's roll down to a 40-yard number. So to get to a 40-yard zero from my 100-yard, I need to come up 0.6 mils. So let's go to the 40-yard line. I'll dial up 0.6. I'll shoot those on paper, and then we'll work out to 275 yards on the same sheet of paper so you can see where my impacts land. This should be super fun. Here we are at the 40-yard line. I'll go ahead and dial up my 0.6 mils. And we're going to hold dead center of the target there, and we should be able to put our impact pretty well centered up. Remember, I had a 100-yard zero, so I have to dial up to get to my 40-yard zero. Okay. And those are spot on. I'm actually going to come to the right a tenth, but this shows us the math is working perfectly. So let's come right a tenth. And with that, we'll push back and we'll start shooting out to 275 yards to show you the concept. We've moved back to 100 yards. I've got 3 rounds loaded up, and I've got my 40-yard max point blank range zero dialed on. Let's go ahead and send those 3 rounds holding center of the orange dot. Now, certainly many hunting situations you'll be doing from a tripod, so I decided it'd be kind of fun to get my Ultradyne out and use this instead of laying prone. So we're going to be shooting off of the Ultradyne tripod for the rest of the video here. So this tripod's new to me. I've only used it in 1 match so far. Carbon fiber, I like it. Takes a little bit of getting used to. That thumb wheel there adjusts my tension. Zoom in just a bit. And all right, here we go. 3 rounds, centered up. All right, so those are landing just a little bit high, as they should be. Let's push back further, see where my next rounds land. My apologies here. I actually forgot to run the GoPro or the trigger cam on the 100-yard course of fire, so I'm going to splice in this quick clip to show you how my 100-yard performance landed. So at 100 yards, I was aiming dead center, and these are the 3 rounds that landed here. So you can see a pretty decent group there, maybe a ½ inch, but they pushed a little bit higher than the calculator said. I'm going to measure those. The center of that group, we're going to call that, I'll get you a picture. I'm going to call that 2.5 inches high to the center of that group, trending just a little bit above what the calculator called for, but still within my 3-inch margin of error. So with that, let's push on back a little bit further. I believe I've got all my cameras running this time. We're back at about 150 yards, and we're going to do the same course of fire. Hold dead center and see where the rounds land. So here we go. All right, let's push out further. Here we are back at the 200-yard line. Let's repeat the course of fire. I got 3 rounds loaded up, and we're going to aim dead center of the orange circle with our 40-yard max point blank 0 dialed on. All right, you're going to have to let me know what you're seeing in the GoPro. The previous impacts were taped over. I'm going to work back from here on out without taping, and I'll review the GoPro before we wrap up at the end of the video. Next up, 250 yards, 3 rounds with our 40-yard max point blank 0 dialed on. So let's go ahead. Remember, we're going to hold dead center of the orange circle. All right, once again, I can't see them. You're going to have to let me know what you're seeing in the GoPro. In theory, they should be just a little bit below my point of aim. Now we're going to push back out to about 280 yards, which should be the bottom edge of our max point. So let's go try that out. Our last string of fire will be here at 280 yards, which per the calculator should be the bottom edge of our 3-inch margin of error below the target. So with that, I've got 3 rounds loaded up. We'll go ahead and fire those at the center dot using our 40-yard 0. You can see there's a left to right wind in the mirage, but we should still be able to capture these on paper. All right, that's all the rounds to fire. Let's go take a close-up look at how we performed on the paper. Let me know what you saw in the comments. All right, that's all the rounds I've got for this video. Now let's take a close-up look at exactly where they landed. Remember, we started the video looking at the theory of the max point blank range 0, and I felt like a 40-yard 0 on my rifle would allow me to make impacts plus or minus 3 inches from my point of aim out to about 280 yards. Again, the theory in the calculator said that would work perfectly. What exactly did we see when we started shooting? Now remember, I had a 100-yard 0 on this rifle originally, but my max point blank range of 40 yards, I dialed up 0.6 mils, moved to the 40-yard line, and shot this group. 3 rounds, perfectly centered up, just a little bit to the left. We're going to see that winded trend all the way out, but elevation-wise, very good. Then I moved out to the 100-yard line, kept that same 40-yard max point blank 0, fired 3 rounds, which landed right here under this tape. I'll insert the clip now with a picture, and those are about 2.5 inches high versus my point of aim. So just pushing up toward the top edge of what I call the lethal zone on this target. Then I moved out to the 150-yard line where I kept the 40-yard 0, and I fired the 3 rounds right here. They landed almost exactly the same elevation within my 3-inch margin of error. Next up, I pushed out to the 200-yard line where I fired these 3 rounds here, which are uncovered. Those 3 rounds, put my tape up there, I'm going to call those about probably 2 inches, just shy of 2 inches high. This third one right here dropped a little bit low, but again, this is reality, not theory, and that group right there, call it centered up, it's very much within the lethal zone on my target. Next up, we pushed out to 250 yards, and I'll show you those impacts by moving some tape around. Tape over that. Then I had a flyer here at 250, probably me. All right, now my 250-yard impacts were here, here, and here. I believe this one was likely a flyer, so I'm going to measure the center of that group there. Call it probably 2-ish inches below my point of aim. So still within my margin of error. Certainly this flyer, that would be a miss on whatever target I was shooting at. That one I believe was me. Maybe I wasn't that steady. You'll have to review the footage and let me know. But ultimately, I think the bulk of that group lands within my lethal zone. Then I pushed out, and I'll move some tape around again, to 280 yards, which I felt like was the max distance for my max point blank on this rifle. And for 280, you can see these impacts here. The 280 yards I had here, here, and here, landing just a little bit lower than the 250 yard group. I'm going to measure the center of that group from here down to about the 3-inch line. So I believe the math actually lines up just about right. The bulk of that group is probably centered up around 3 inches low, maybe just a little bit below it. So you think about the theory. The theory was I was going to be between 3 and -3 with a 40-yard zero. The reality was there's shooter error that plays into this. And with that, I had 2 rounds that actually dropped low outside of my lethal zone. Everything else, you can see every other round that I fired landed within my lethal zone and would have been a fatal shot. So the theory of max point blank range is awesome. I think the key thing to keep in mind is you need to go out and try your specific rifle. If it were me and I was shooting a 6-inch tall target plus or minus 3 inches with this rifle, I would run that 40-yard zero, but I would know my max distance is roughly 250 yards, 260 yards. If I got out to 280, I'd be kind of pushing it and I would be dropping outside of the lethal zone. I'd need to favor high, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the max point blank, where it's designed to hold center and land between the range here. So I don't know about you. Let me know in the comments down below. What did you think? I love testing theory versus reality. Theory is awesome, but when you put it out here on the range, you can definitely see reality sometimes is a little bit different. There's shooter error, there's windage, there's factors that play into this that sometimes don't show up in the ballistic calculator. As always, you're going to want to train and try out your specific rifle. And don't forget, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this concept, sure, I used an 18-inch 6-arc, but it will play out on any rifle. You can go through the steps at the beginning of this video and get these same results with any rig that you're running. So with that, let's wrap up. Let's take a couple of minutes and summarize what we saw in this video. Now, I run through my summary. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What do you think about max point blank range zero? Is that something you're running on your rifle, or maybe you want to go out and try after seeing this video? Do you agree with me that max point blank range is different from battle zero? As I mentioned earlier in the video, I feel like it's 2 different concepts that you can employ with a rifle, but I'd love to hear from you. Do you agree? Do you think they're the same thing? Let me know. I'd love to chat with you. Now, in summary, what we saw in this video, I believe, is the real world performance lined up very close with the theory. Now, you saw me shoot a 6-inch vital zone on a sheet of paper there that had graduations. And within about 200 yards, all of my impacts were high, no more than 3 inches, so within the vital zone. Then as I pushed out to about 200 yards, my impacts landed very close to point of aim, meaning my far zero was in the ballpark of a little past 200 yards, maybe 210, 220 yards for my far zero. Then beyond that, I pushed out to 250 and then 280 yards, where we saw my impacts push down low, pushing toward the bottom edge of that 3-inch error that we could accept. So that's where I felt like the theory maybe varied a little bit from real world performance. In real world, you're not going to shoot a tiny group every single time. You saw one of my impacts at 250, pushed way low and right, likely me as a shooter, but had that been on an animal, that would not have landed in the vital zone. So maybe for this rifle, if I was shooting an animal with a 6-inch vital zone, maybe I need to keep my shots within that 250-yard line, 270 yards, something where I have a little bit of margin of error. I'm not pushing up against the boundaries in my vital zone. That's where I'd love to hear comments from you. So really, I believe we saw the theory line up very well with the real world performance, and it's super simple to set this up for your rifle if you follow the steps that I laid out below. Now, if you've made it this far, I really appreciate you sticking around to check out my video. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you made it this far, I'd like to ask you to help me grow this channel. It's really easy to do that. You can like this video, comment, best of all is subscribe. If you subscribe, you'll be in line for my next video drop. You'll see it when it happens, and you'll be there to watch it and enjoy it with me. So finally, don't forget to check me out on Instagram at Mountains Mullets America. It's a great place for us to interact. Once again, thanks for watching. Hope to see you in my next video drop. It'll be coming very soon.